The Forest Service truck bounced over the last stretch of dirt road, kicking up dust that hung in the still July air. I'd spent 3 hours driving from Prince George, the rental car's air conditioning fighting a losing battle against the summer heat. According to the wrinkled map spread across my passenger seat, this final turn should lead to the Caribou Mountain Fire Lookout, my home for the next 4 months. The road narrowed to little more than a trail. Pine and spruce crowded in from both sides, branches occasionally scraping against the windows. When the trees finally opened up, I saw it, a wooden tower perched on stilts, rising 60 feet above a small clearing. Beside it sat a faded blue pickup truck, at least 20 years old, with Forest Service emblems on the doors. I parked and stepped out, stretching my back. My boots crunched on gravel and pine needles. The silence hit me first. No traffic, no people, just wind through treetops and the occasional bird call. The air smelled of sun-warmed pine sap and dust. A man emerged from the base of the tower. He moved with the deliberate pace of someone conserving energy, like every step cost something. His beard was more white than gray, and his face had the leathery texture of someone who'd spent decades outdoors. He wore a faded flannel shirt despite the heat. "You, Mitchell?" His voice was rough, like he didn't use it much. "David Mitchell, yes." I extended my hand. "You must be Robert." "Bob." He shook my hand briefly, his palm calloused. "Been waiting since morning. Radio said you'd be here by noon." I checked my watch. Nearly 2:30. "Sorry about that. Rental car took longer than expected, and the directions were... Doesn't matter now." He looked past me, scanning the tree line. "Got your stuff? We should get up top. Don't like standing in the open longer than needed." I grabbed my duffel and backpack from the car, noticing Bob already had his bag waiting. It was a canvas duffel, patched in multiple places, with a Forest Service patch almost completely faded. The climb up the tower took longer than I expected. 63 wooden steps, each one creaking under our weight. I counted them automatically, a habit from my geology fieldwork days. Bob climbed without pausing, not looking back to see if I followed. The tower room itself was small but functional, maybe 16 feet square. Windows on all sides offered unobstructed views of rolling mountains covered in dark green forest. A desk with radio equipment occupied one wall. A narrow cot sat in the corner, a small propane stove, a sink with a hand pump, and shelves stocked with canned goods made up the kitchen area. A wooden table with 2 chairs stood in the center. 4 months up here? I set my bags down by the cot. Bob was already rifling through a drawer in the desk. May seem small at first, won't notice after a while. I've done field stations before. Spent 3 months in Alaska monitoring seismic activity. Smaller place than this. He nodded without looking up. Radio check-ins are at 7 morning and 7 evening. Record weather readings every 4 hours during daylight. Look for smoke, obviously. Fire risk assessment forms are there. He pointed to a clipboard hanging by the radio. Location maps are in the desk. Maintenance log for the tower is under the sink. I took mental notes, recognizing the familiar rhythm of a job handover. Simple enough. Spot fires, report weather, maintain the station. The Forest Service had given me the basics during orientation, but each lookout had its quirks. Bob pulled a folded piece of paper from the drawer. It looked like it had been folded and unfolded countless times, the creases worn to the point of tearing. He hesitated, turning it over in his hands. "Something else?" I asked. He approached the table, smoothing the paper flat. His weathered hands pressed out the creases with unusual care. I moved closer to see what warranted such attention. It was a handwritten list, 5 numbered items in faded blue ink, the handwriting precise but clearly done years ago. At the top, underlined twice, rules. "These aren't in the manual," Bob said quietly. I read the first one. 1. Never leave the tower between midnight and 6 a.m., no matter what you hear, no matter what you see. "What is this?" I looked up at him. the rest of the orientation. His face was deadly serious now, his eyes fixed on mine. More important than anything else, I'll tell you. I continued reading. 2. If a black deer approaches the tower, leave food outside. Any food will do. Make sure it eats before moving on. 3. Voices in the woods calling for help are not real people. Do not respond. Do not investigate. Do not radio about them. 4. A man in a red jacket may visit. Be polite. Accept what he offers. After he leaves, bury it behind the tower. Do not eat or drink anything he gives you. 5. If a young girl in a yellow raincoat knocks, let her in. She'll claim to be lost. Let her stay until morning. I looked up, expecting to see the hint of a smile, some indication this was a joke played on the new guy. But Bob's expression remained unchanged, grave, almost haunted. Forest Service know about these rules? I tried to keep my tone neutral. They know the job gets to people sometimes. Isolation does things to the mind. He tapped the paper. But this isn't that. Then what is it? He looked out the window toward the western ridgeline. Been here 11 summers. Followed the rules every day. Still alive. He turned back to me. 2 lookouts before me didn't make it a full season. Accidents happen in remote locations, I said. That's why we have protocols. Wasn't accidents. His voice dropped. First one they found parts of. Second one they never found at all. Just an empty tower with the radio still on. A chill ran up my spine despite the warm air. I'd done enough field work to know isolation could feed paranoia. Working alone in remote areas created patterns in the mind, rituals to cope with solitude. I'd seen it before. Researchers who wouldn't work without specific lucky items, who developed elaborate routines to stave off the crushing sense of being utterly alone in the wilderness. I appreciate the heads up, I said carefully, but I'll stick to Forest Service protocols. Bob stared at me for a long moment, then folded the paper and held it out. Your choice, but keep this. I took it to avoid argument, tucking it into my shirt pocket. I'll go through the official handover checklist if you're ready. For the next hour, we went through the standard procedures. Bob showed me how to use the Osborne Firefinder to pinpoint smoke locations, demonstrated the quirks of the radio system, and explained the logbook entries. All perfectly normal professional information. No more mention of mysterious rules or missing lookouts. As evening approached, Bob gathered his few belongings. I noticed he checked his watch repeatedly as the shadows lengthened. Need to get down the mountain before dark, he explained, shouldering his duffel. Road's tricky even in daylight. At the trap door leading to the stairs, he paused. Mitchell. Yeah? The rules. He didn't look at me. I didn't believe them either my first season. I didn't respond. Keep the doors locked at night. He started down the stairs without looking back. I watched from the tower as his pickup disappeared down the access road, dust trailing behind it. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the clearing. The radio crackled with the evening check-in from dispatch, which I answered according to protocol. Mitchell at Caribou Lookout. All clear. Weather stable. Over. After the check-in, I unpacked my supplies and organized my gear. The tower creaked and settled as the evening cooled. Outside, the forest darkened into a solid wall of black. I found myself taking the folded paper from my pocket, smoothing it out on the table. The rules seemed even more absurd now that I was alone. Black deer requiring feeding, voices in the woods, visitors in bright clothing. It read like something from a children's fairy tale. Don't leave the path, don't talk to strangers. I refolded the paper and tucked it into the desk drawer. Whatever had haunted Bob wouldn't trouble me. I had a job to do, a straightforward one at that. Watch for fires, report weather, maintain the tower. The radio hissed with static in the quiet room. I switched off the main light, leaving just the small lamp by the cot. Outside, the vast darkness of the Caribou Mountains surrounded me completely, broken only by the brilliant canopy of stars overhead. I'd always been comfortable with solitude. This would be no different than my other field assignments. I checked the door, locked, as per standard protocol. Not because of Bob's warnings, just good sense when alone in the wilderness. My watch read 9:45. Early, but there wasn't much else to do. I laid on the cot, listening to the night sounds filtering through the partially opened windows, wind in the trees, the occasional creak of the tower. Nothing unusual. Nothing that would require strange rules to survive. I spent the evening making the lookout tower habitable. The previous occupant, Bob, had left the place tidy enough, but I needed to arrange things according to my own system. I wiped down the counters, organized the canned goods by type, and set up my personal items in the small space that would be home for the next 4 months. The isolation felt familiar. My work as a field geologist had prepared me for remote locations, though this tower offered more amenities than some research stations I'd occupied. A propane stove, a decent cot, and windows that captured cross breezes when opened properly. I'd hung my clothes on the available hooks and tucked my duffel under the cot. The tower creaked occasionally as wind pressed against its wooden frame. While setting up my weather monitoring equipment, I caught myself glancing at the desk drawer where I'd stashed Bob's rule sheet. Ridiculous precautions from a man who'd spent too many seasons alone. The isolation could get to anyone eventually. I completed the evening radio check at 7 sharp, recording clear conditions and no smoke sightings in the logbook. The dispatcher sounded bored, running through the same routine with a dozen lookouts scattered across the mountains. As darkness settled, I plotted my schedule for the next day on a notepad. The ritual helped establish normalcy. I'd worked enough remote assignments to know that routine prevented the mind from wandering down unhelpful paths. The digital clock by my cot read 11:47 when movement outside caught my eye. I'd been inventorying supplies, noting items to request on the next supply run. Something dark shifted at the tree line, distinct from the swaying branches. I moved to the north-facing window, killing the interior light to eliminate reflection. The moon had risen, 3/4 full, casting enough light to transform the clearing into a monochrome photograph. At the edge where forest met open ground stood a deer, motionless, watching the tower. Its coat absorbed moonlight rather than reflecting it. Black. Not the brown or gray of typical mule deer, but a darkness that seemed to pull shadows around itself. Only its eyes caught the light, twin points glimmering like wet stones. Rule number 2 from Bob's list surfaced in my mind. If a black deer approaches the tower, leave food outside. Any food will do. Make sure it eats before moving on. Coincidence, I muttered, though my voice sounded unconvincing even to myself. The deer hadn't moved. It stood perfectly still, its attention fixed on the tower, on me. I'd encountered enough wildlife to recognize when an animal's behavior pattern breaks from normal. This wasn't normal. I opened the cabinet where I'd organized the canned goods. My hand hovered over the options before selecting peaches and syrup. The rational part of my brain argued against wasting food on wildlife. Standard Forest Service protocol explicitly prohibited feeding animals. Yet something else, something more primal, urged compliance with Bob's instruction. The trapdoor to the exterior stairs squealed slightly when I lifted it. Cool night air rushed in, carrying the scent of pine and soil. I stepped onto the small landing platform, the wooden boards creaking under my weight. 60 feet below, the clearing remained empty except for the black deer. It hadn't retreated at my appearance or the noise. Its stillness felt deliberate, expectant. I peeled back the metal lid, the sound seeming unnaturally loud in the night silence. The sweet smell of preserved fruit rose from the can. I placed it at the edge of the platform, then backed up 3 steps toward the door. "There you go," I said, feeling foolish for speaking to it. "That's all I've got." Back inside, I doused the light again and watched through the window. 5 minutes passed. 10. The deer hadn't moved. Then, without any visible transition, it stood at the base of the tower. I hadn't seen it cross the clearing or approach. It simply was there, as if it had always been there. It climbed the stairs, not bounded up like a startled deer might, but ascended with the measured pace of something following a familiar path. Each step should have produced a creak. The stairs had protested under my weight, but the deer moved in silence. When it reached the platform, it lowered its head to the can. The platform remained perfectly visible from my vantage point, the peaches gleaming pale in the moonlight. The deer consumed them methodically, each mouthful deliberate. After finishing, it raised its head. For 3 heartbeats, it stared directly at my window, though I stood in darkness. Its eyes reflected nothing now, 2 voids where moonlight disappeared. Then it descended, each step as silent as its ascent. At the tree line, it paused once more, looking back toward the tower. Then the shadows between the trees seemed to thicken around it, until I could no longer distinguish its form from the darkness. I realized I'd been holding my breath. My palms were damp. I switched on the light, half expecting to find the deer still on the platform when I checked again. The landing stood empty except for the can, licked clean of syrup, tipped onto its side. I retrieved it, noting the absence of condensation on the metal despite the cool night air. The can felt neither cold nor warm against my fingers, just empty. Back inside, I checked the clock, 12:36. I'd been watching the deer for nearly an hour, though it had felt like minutes. I recorded the encounter in my personal notebook rather than the official log. The Forest Service had protocols for wildlife sightings, but something told me this wasn't the kind of encounter they had forms for. Sleep eluded me. The digital clock read 2:09 when I heard it, a woman's voice, distant but clear. "Hello? Is someone there? I need help." I sat up, reaching for the flashlight beside my cot. The voice came again, closer this time. "Please, I'm hurt. I can see your light. Help me." Rule number 3. Voices in the woods calling for help are not real people. Do not respond. Do not investigate. Do not radio about them. I moved to the window, scanning the tree line with my flashlight. The beam caught nothing but trunks and undergrowth. "I've been out here for hours. Please." The voice came from the east side now, though it had first sounded from the north. I swung the light in that direction. Nothing. My hand reached for the radio. Standard procedure for a distress call was clear. Note the location, alert dispatch, maintain communication with the victim until help arrived. My fingers curled around the handset. "I'm bleeding. God, please help me." The desperation in the voice tightened something in my chest. If someone was truly injured out there, minutes could mean the difference between life and death. The nearest ranger station was 2 hours away, the nearest hospital nearly 4. I lifted the radio, then hesitated. Bob's weathered face appeared in my mind, his eyes steady as he'd handed me the rules. I've been here 11 summers, followed the rules every day, still alive. The voice shifted again, now from the south side. "I can see you in the window. Why won't you help me?" Impossible. I'd moved away from the window, standing now in the center of the room. No one could see me from that angle. I switched off my flashlight. "Don't leave me out here to die." The voice cracked with a sob that sounded genuinely human, genuinely terrified. I set the radio down and retreated to my cot, covering my ears with the pillow. The voice continued, sometimes pleading, sometimes crying, sometimes angrily demanding why I wouldn't respond. It moved around the tower as if circling, never staying in one spot for long. The longest hour of my life passed this way. The voice grew hoarse, then quieter, then faded entirely as the eastern sky lightened from black to deep blue. Dawn approached with the promise of normality. I made coffee with shaking hands, spilling grounds on the counter. The ordinary task anchored me as sunlight gradually filled the tower room, By 6:30, birds were singing in the trees below, and the world seemed solid and rational again. I reached for the desk drawer, retrieving Bob's folded paper. The rules that had seemed so absurd yesterday now felt like a lifeline. I read them again, then carefully refolded the paper and placed it in my shirt pocket. The morning radio check came at 7. I reported clear conditions, my voice steadier than I expected. No mention of night visitors, neither deer nor disembodied voices. Some things didn't belong in official reports. As I scanned the forest with binoculars, conducting my first daylight sweep for smoke, I wondered what other rules I would need to follow before my 4 months ended. The black deer had come on my first night. The voice had followed hours later. I checked my pocket, feeling the folded paper through the fabric of my shirt. 3 more rules waited to be tested. I hoped they wouldn't all find me so quickly. I spent most of the morning completing the tower maintenance checklist. The logbook showed Bob had been diligent about small repairs, but I found loose floorboards near the east window that needed securing. I drove nails back into place, noting the repair in the log with today's date. Creating a paper trail of maintenance gave me something concrete to focus on after last night's unsettling events. At noon, I completed the weather readings. Barometric pressure holding steady at 29.8 inches, temperature 68 degrees, humidity 42%, wind from the northwest at 8 miles per hour. Perfect fire weather, dry enough to burn, just enough wind to spread it. I'd skipped breakfast. My appetite diminished after the night visitors. The coffee helped. I drank it black, standing at the west window while scanning quadrants with binoculars. The Caribou Mountains stretched in layers of blue-green ridges, undisturbed except for a hawk riding thermals above the valley. My shirt pocket felt heavy with Bob's folded rule sheet. 2 rules tested, 2 rules confirmed. I wasn't ready to believe in the supernatural, but I couldn't deny what I'd witnessed. The deer's impossible silence. The voice that circled the tower. Seeing things it couldn't possibly see. At 1:15, movement on the access trail caught my attention. A figure emerged from the tree line, a man walking with the confident stride of someone who knew where he was going. The bright red of his jacket stood out against the forest backdrop like a warning flag. Rule 4. A man in a red jacket may visit. Be polite. Accept what he offers. After he leaves, bury it behind the tower. Do not eat or drink anything he gives you. I lowered my binoculars, breath-catching. The timing felt deliberate, as if the rules weren't just precautions, but a schedule of visitations. I checked that the trapdoor was unlocked. Refusing entry seemed unwise based on Bob's wording, and waited. His footsteps on the wooden stairs sounded normal, unlike the deer's silent ascent. 4 distinct rhythms. Step, pause, step, pause. He wasn't rushing. When he reached the platform, he knocked 3 times, crisp and businesslike. "Hello?" His voice carried easily through the door. "Forest Service. Anybody home?" I opened the door, keeping my expression neutral. The man stood with perfect posture, one hand raised in a friendly half-wave. His jacket was pristine, no dust on the sleeves or sweat stains despite the climb. Forest Service patch on the shoulder just like mine, but the stitching looked too even, too new. "Afternoon," he said, smiling with teeth that seemed uniformly white. "Jack Harmon, Regional Coordinator. Mind if I come in? Been hiking since morning." I stepped aside. David Mitchell. The new lookout, right? Thought I'd check how you're settling in. He moved past me into the tower, bringing no scent of sweat or forest with him. His boots left no dirt on the floor. "Heard Bob finally retired. About time. Guy was getting peculiar." Jack set his backpack on the table and unzipped it. No trail dust on the fabric, no wear on the seams. "Coffee?" He produced a steel thermos, unscrewing the cap. Steam rose immediately, the rich aroma filling the small space. "Brewed it fresh before heading up. And I've got sandwiches. Roast beef and cheddar. Figure you must be getting tired of those canned beans already." He pulled out a paper bag and set it beside the thermos. The paper showed no signs of being carried through miles of forest. No dampness from condensation, no crumpled edges. "That's thoughtful," I said, remembering Bob's instruction to be polite. "Just had lunch, though. Coffee, then?" He'd already taken 2 metal cups from his pack and was pouring. The liquid looked darker than normal coffee, with an oily sheen on its surface. "Thanks." I accepted the cup but didn't drink. "How long have you been with the service?" "Long enough to know every lookout tower in 3 districts." He glanced around the room, his gaze lingering on the desk where I kept the logbook. 17 years this August." He didn't look old enough for 17 years of service. No lines around his eyes, no sun damage on his smooth skin. "You walk up from the ranger station?" I asked, setting the untouched coffee on the counter. "Parked at the lower junction and hiked in. Beautiful country." Jack leaned against the table, completely at ease. "Not many people could handle the isolation up here. Most lookouts last 1 season, maybe 2. Bob was unusual. 11 seasons, wasn't it?" I nodded, noting how he'd known the exact number. "What brought you to fire spotting, David? Your file mentioned geology background." "My file?" I hadn't filed employment paperwork at the local ranger station yet. It was scheduled for my first supply run next week. "Change of pace," I said. "Wanted something straightforward." Jack laughed, the sound too perfect, like something practiced. "Nothing straightforward about these mountains? You'll see." He opened the paper bag. "Sure you won't try a sandwich? Made them myself this morning." The bread looked impossibly fresh, with no signs of being compressed in a backpack. The edges of the roast beef were uniformly sliced, precisely arranged. "I'm good, thanks, but I appreciate you bringing them." Jack took a slow sip from his cup, watching me over the rim. His eyes never blinked. "You should eat when food's offered, David. Long way to the store." He pushed the bag toward me. "Take it, at least, for later." "I will. Thank you." I picked up the bag, feeling the unnatural weight of it. Too heavy for just sandwiches. Jack checked his watch, an expensive-looking piece with no brand markings. "Better get moving if I want to make it down before dark. Roads around here get tricky at night." The same phrase Bob had used when leaving. Jack packed the thermos, but left the filled coffee cups. "Enjoy the coffee. I'll check in on you again soon." He shouldered his too-clean backpack. "Any messages you want carried back to the station? Radio working all right?" "Everything's fine." I moved toward the door, opening it for him. "Radio's clear, no issues to report." "Good man." He stepped onto the platform, then turned back. "Oh, and David, the rules Bob left, they're important. More important than you might realize." My hand tightened on the door frame. What rules would those be? Jack's smile widened a fraction too far. "You know the ones. Sleep well, look out, I'll be seeing you." I watched him descend the stairs, his movements too fluid, each step placed with impossible precision. At the clearing's edge, he turned and waved once before disappearing into the trees. Unlike Bob's truck kicking up dust, Jack left no sign of his passing. No bent grass, no disturbed undergrowth. I closed the door and slid the bolt home, though it was barely 2 in the afternoon. The coffee cups sat on the counter, liquid still steaming despite sitting untouched for minutes. I approached carefully, noting the absence of condensation on the metal. The surface of the liquid remained perfectly still, not a ripple despite my movement nearby. I carried both cups to the sink and poured the contents down the drain. The liquid moved wrong, too thick, clinging to the sides of the sink. I ran water until no trace remained, then pumped more water to wash my hands. The paper bag sat on the table where Jack had left it. Through the brown paper, the outline of 3 identical sandwiches was visible. I didn't open it to inspect them further. I retrieved a small folding shovel from the storage cabinet and lifted the trap door. The afternoon sun beat down as I descended to the clearing below. Around the back of the tower, out of sight from the main trail, I dug a hole 2 feet deep. The soil was dark and rich, coming away in clumps that broke apart easily. I placed the paper bag in the hole without opening it, then filled the earth back in, tamping it down with the shovel blade. When finished, I smoothed the surface and scattered pine needles over the disturbed ground. Back in the tower, I washed my hands again, scrubbing under my fingernails. I recorded the weather readings for the 2 o'clock check, but made no mention of Jack's visit in the official log. Instead, I took out my personal notebook and documented everything. His too clean appearance, the perfect food, his knowledge of Bob's rules, the way he moved through the forest without disturbing it. The afternoon passed quietly. I completed my normal patrol rotation, sweeping each quadrant with binoculars for smoke. The radio check at 7 confirmed all clear conditions throughout the district. No fires, no weather warnings. As darkness settled over the mountains, I found myself checking the locks twice, then a third time. I folded Bob's rule sheet and returned it to my shirt pocket rather than the desk drawer. 3 rules confirmed now. 2 visitors down, 1 to go. The girl in the yellow raincoat. I wondered when she would arrive and what she was running from. I completed my final weather reading at 8:15. Temperature dropping to 49 degrees, wind from the northwest at 4 miles per hour, humidity climbing to 67%. The day's clear conditions had given way to scattered clouds moving in from the north. I logged everything in the tower records, then closed the book. After washing my dinner plate, canned stew heated on the propane stove, I laid out my clothes for morning on the hook beside the cot. The routine helped maintain normalcy despite the previous night's visitors. I'd added my own rule to Bob's list: check all locks before dark. At 9:30, I dimmed the main light and settled on the cot with a paperback thriller I'd packed. The story failed to hold my attention. My eyes kept drifting to the windows, searching the darkness beyond the glass. The folded rule sheet in my shirt pocket seemed to grow heavier with each passing hour. 4 rules so far. 4 rules that had proven true. 1 remained untested. A young girl in a yellow raincoat may seek shelter. Let her in. She will stay until morning. I checked the locks one last time before stretching out on the cot. The tower creaked as temperature dropped, wood contracting against metal fittings. Each sound registered with new significance after the events of the past 2 days. My watch read 10:43 when I heard it. A light tapping at the door. 3 gentle knocks, barely audible above the wind. I sat up, listening. The sound came again, slightly firmer. Deliberate knocks. Not random settling or branch impacts. Moving to the window, I peered into the darkness. The platform outside the door remained in shadow, but a splash of bright yellow caught the edge of the interior light spilling through the glass. My throat tightened. Rule 5. I unbolted the door and pulled it open. A small figure stood on the landing, head bowed, shoulders hunched against the night air. A bright yellow raincoat, hood pulled forward, obscured most of her features. She looked up slowly, revealing a young face, perhaps 10 years old, with pale cheeks streaked with what appeared to be tears or rain. "Are you the forest man?" Her voice came small and uncertain. "I got lost. I can't find my parents." I stepped back, opening the door wider. "Come inside, it's cold out there." She hesitated, 1 foot sliding forward, then back. "You're not supposed to go with strangers. That's what my mom says. I work for the Forest Service." I pointed to the patch on my shirt sleeve. "This is a fire lookout tower. We help people who are lost." She studied me, then nodded once and stepped inside. The movement brought her into the full light, revealing mud-caked hiking boots beneath her raincoat. No backpack, no water bottle, no flashlight. Nothing a child on a family camping trip would typically carry. "I'm David," I said, closing the door but leaving it unbolted. "What's your name?" "Emma." She stood in the center of the room, not touching anything, raincoat dripping onto the wooden floor. except it wasn't dripping. I noticed the fabric was completely dry despite her claim of being caught in the rain. "How long have you been walking, Emma?" She shrugged one shoulder. "A long time. It got dark. Then I saw your light." She pointed to the window. "Up high, like a star." I gestured to the small couch beneath the south window. "Why don't you sit down? Are you hungry?" "No, thank you." She moved to the couch and perched on its edge, hands folded in her lap, yellow raincoat buttoned to her chin. "I just need to rest. My mom and dad will be looking for me." I filled a mug with water from the pump and set it on the small table beside her. "Where were you camping?" "By the lake." She didn't reach for the water. "The one with the big rocks. Dad said we could fish there." No specific lake name, no campground identification, no details that could be verified. "I can radio the ranger station," I said, moving toward the communications desk. "They can help locate your parents. They're probably very worried." Emma's gaze followed me, her expression unchanging. "The radio won't work." "Why not?" "It just won't." She stated this with flat certainty. I picked up the handset anyway and pressed the transmit button. "Lookout 47 to dispatch, come in." Static hissed from the speaker. I adjusted the frequency and tried again. "Lookout 47 to any station. Priority traffic, over." Nothing but crackling interference. The radio had worked perfectly for the evening check just hours earlier. I set the handset down, feeling Emma's eyes on me. "Sometimes the mountains block the signal at night," I said, though I'd never experienced such complete radio failure before. "We can try again in the morning." She nodded, unsurprised. "Can I sleep here? Just until it's light?" "Of course." I retrieved a wool blanket from the storage cabinet and offered it to her. "You can use the couch. I'll be right over there if you need anything." Emma accepted the blanket without touching my hand. She arranged it over her legs, but didn't remove her raincoat or boots. "Aren't you warm in that coat?" I asked. "I'm fine." She smoothed the yellow fabric with small, pale fingers. "I always wear it." I returned to my cot, leaving the small reading lamp on. Emma sat perfectly still, her posture unnaturally rigid for a child. Her gaze moved methodically around the tower room, studying each object as if cataloging its purpose. "Do your parents know about this tower?" I asked, attempting to gather information that might help locate her family in the morning. "Everybody knows about the tower," she replied. "It's always been here." Not quite true. According to the logbook, this particular structure had been built in 1978, replacing an older tower destroyed by lightning. "How old are you, Emma?" She looked at me directly for the first time since entering. Her eyes reflected the lamplight oddly, too bright, like an animal's. 10, she said after a pause that lasted too long. "I'm 10 years old." I nodded, noting the hesitation. "You should try to sleep. We'll figure everything out in the morning." She didn't respond, but eventually curled onto her side, still fully dressed, yellow raincoat buttoned to her chin, boots hanging off the couch end. Her eyes remained open, watching the ceiling. I lay back on my cot, one arm behind my head, maintaining the appearance of relaxation while staying alert. The tower fell silent except for the occasional creak and the soft whisper of wind through the partially opened window. At some point, Emma's eyes closed. Her breathing became deep and regular. I checked my watch, 11:27. I wondered if I should attempt to reach the ranger station on the backup radio channel, but something kept me from trying. Bob's rules had proven accurate so far. If Rule 5 dictated sheltering this strange child until morning, there was likely a reason. I must have dozed despite my intention to remain vigilant. The sound of heavy footsteps on the stairs jolted me awake. My watch read 3:17 in the morning. Emma remained asleep on the couch, unmoved from her earlier position, raincoat still buttoned tight. The footsteps reached the platform, followed by 3 loud knocks that rattled the door in its frame. Nothing like Emma's gentle tapping. These were demanding, aggressive. "Mitchell!" a man's voice called through the door. "Open up! Forest Service!" Jack's voice. I recognized the forced friendliness beneath the authoritative tone. I moved silently to the window, staying clear of direct sight lines. Jack stood on the platform in his pristine red jacket, no flashlight, yet somehow clearly visible in the pre-dawn darkness. His posture had changed from his earlier visit, shoulders squared, stance wide, hands clenched at his sides. "I know you're in there," he called, voice hardening. "We have a situation. Emergency protocols." I remained silent, watching. Emma hadn't stirred despite the noise. Jack pounded again, harder this time. "There's a missing child report. Parents at the ranger station right now. Description matches a girl who might have come this way." A plausible story, except for the time. 3 a.m. was an unlikely hour for search coordination, especially in the darkness where a ground search would be dangerous and ineffective. "Mitchell!" Jack's voice lost its professional veneer, dropping to something colder. "I know she's in there. Open the door now." I glanced at Emma. Her eyes were open, watching me, though she hadn't moved or made a sound. Our gazes met, and she gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of her head. Jack circled the platform, trying to peer through each window. I kept away from his line of sight. When he returned to the door, his pounding had become a rhythmic hammering. "Last chance, look out," he called. "Open up, or there will be consequences." I moved to the door, but didn't unlock it. "It's the middle of the night," I called back. "Radio dispatch if there's an emergency." "Radio's down across the district," he replied immediately. "Storm damage. I've been hiking since midnight to reach outlying posts." Another plausible lie. The night was clear now, stars visible through the windows, no sign of storm damage. "I'll check in with dispatch at first light," I said. "Standard protocol." A pause followed, then a sound that might have been a laugh, except it contained no humor. "She doesn't belong to you," Jack said, voice lower now. "She's not what you think. Let me take her back where she belongs." I didn't respond. The rule was clear. Let her in. She will stay until morning. "You don't understand what you're protecting," Jack continued. His tone had changed again, almost conversational, as if we were discussing something ordinary over coffee. "Ask yourself why she comes here. Ask yourself what she's running from." Metal scraped against metal, the sound of something working at the lock. I grabbed the wooden chair from the table and wedged it under the doorknob, bracing it against the floor. "Breaking entry protocols," I called through the door. "I'm logging this." The scraping stopped. "You'll regret this, Mitchell," Jack said after a long pause. "When you understand what she is, you'll wish you'd opened the door." His footsteps moved away from the door, circling the platform again. I tracked his movement, keeping away from windows as he passed each one. The tower creaked under his weight in a way it hadn't when Emma arrived. At the east-facing window, he stopped. Through the glass, I could see his profile, sharp and clean against the night sky. "I'll be waiting," he said, not turning toward me but speaking loud enough to be heard through the glass. "When you step outside, when you think it's safe, I'll be there." He descended the stairs with deliberate steps, each one landing heavily on the wooden treads. At the bottom, his red jacket glowed briefly against the darkness before disappearing into the tree line. I returned to the center of the room, heart pounding in my chest. Emma sat upright on the couch, blanket folded neatly beside her, watching me with those 2 bright eyes. "Does he come every time?" I asked, voice barely above a whisper. She nodded once. "He always finds me." "What does he want?" Emma smoothed her yellow raincoat, adjusting a button that didn't need adjusting. "To take me back. Back where? She looked toward the window where Jack had stood. Where I belong. I wanted to ask more questions about Jack, about her, about what was happening in these mountains. But something in her expression stopped me. There was knowledge there, ancient and heavy, at odds with her childlike appearance. You should rest, she said, like an adult might speak to a child. He won't come back tonight. How can you be sure? Rules, she replied simply. Even he has to follow them. I returned to my cot, but didn't sleep. Emma resumed her position on the couch, curled on her side, eyes closed. Neither of us spoke again. The hours passed slowly. I watched the darkness through the windows, alert for any movement, any sign of Jack's return. The forest remained still. First light came at 5:23, pale gray seeping into the eastern sky. As the darkness receded, I felt tension draining from my shoulders. Rule 5 had held true. She will stay until morning. Emma stirred as sunlight touched the windows. She sat up, folding the blanket with precise movements before setting it on the couch arm. Thank you, she said, standing. Her raincoat showed no wrinkles despite being worn all night. I have to go now. Wait, I said, moving to the radio. Let me try to contact your parents. The handset crackled with normal static when I lifted it. The system indicator light glowed green, fully operational as it should be. Lookout 47 to dispatch, come in. The dispatcher's voice came through immediately, clear and professional. Go ahead, 47. I glanced at Emma, who stood by the door, hand on the knob, watching me with those strange, knowing eyes. I hesitated, unsure what to report. A lost child who wasn't lost? A visitor who might not be human? Just confirming morning check-in, all clear at 47. Roger that, 47 weather report. Clear skies, temperature 52 degrees, wind light northwest. Logged. Anything else to report? Emma shook her head slightly, a barely perceptible movement. Negative, dispatch, 47 out. I replaced the handset and turned to Emma. Where will you go? Where I always go, she replied, opening the door. Morning light spilled across the threshold, illuminating her yellow raincoat until it seemed to glow from within. Until next time. Will there be a next time? She paused, one foot on the platform. When it's necessary. Her eyes met mine, solemn and far too old. When he gets too close. Then she was gone, descending the stairs with quiet steps. I moved to the window, watching as she crossed the clearing toward the eastern trail. Her yellow raincoat stood out vividly against the green underbrush until the forest swallowed her. I checked the ground where she had walked, looking for footprints, disturbances in the morning dew. The grass stood unmarked, showing no sign of her passing. 4 nights, 5 rules confirmed. Each visitor had arrived exactly as Bob described. Each had followed the patterns he'd warned about. I wondered how many times he'd cycled through these visitations, watching the deer feed, ignoring the voices, burying Jack's offerings, sheltering Emma. I retrieved Bob's folded rule sheet from my shirt pocket and smoothed it open on the table. The handwritten instructions seemed inadequate now that I'd experienced their significance firsthand. They provided protocol without explanation, procedure without context. Something Emma had said echoed in my mind. Even he has to follow them. Rules that governed not just the tower keeper, but also the visitors themselves. A system of boundaries and permissions extending beyond human understanding. I copied the rules into my personal notebook, word for word, then returned the original to my pocket. 4 months stretched ahead in this tower. 4 months of black deer and desperate voices, of Jack's threats and Emma's visits. I began my morning routine, checking equipment, recording observations, scanning the horizon for smoke. The ordinary tasks grounded me in the familiar, while my mind processed the inexplicable, Whatever watched from the surrounding wilderness, whatever rules governed our interactions, I had accepted my role in the exchange. I was no longer just a fire lookout. I was a keeper of boundaries that extended far beyond the forest's edge. I pressed my back against the wall beside the east window, keeping clear of sight lines while tracking Jack's movements around the tower platform. His footsteps created a distinct rhythm. 3 steps, pause, 3 steps, as if measuring the perimeter with deliberate precision. The sound traveled through the wooden beams, vibrating against my shoulder blades. Emma hadn't moved from the couch. Her raincoat remained buttoned to her chin, hands folded in her lap, eyes fixed on the door, not frightened, watchful. The kind of stillness prey animals maintain when something dangerous prowls nearby. "Mitchell!" Jack's voice carried easily through the glass. "This is Forest Service protocol, missing child emergency response." I stayed silent. The handbook on the shelf contained no such protocol for 3:30 in the morning, especially not one involving a single man with no radio, no backup, and no proper identification. Metal scraped against the door lock. I glanced at the chair wedged beneath the knob, solid oak, braced firmly against the floorboards. The tower's construction provided few entry options: 1 door, windows sealed except for ventilation slats, and a trapdoor kept bolted from inside. "Her parents are worried sick," Jack called, voice shifting to something gentler. "Poor folks have been searching all night. Think about them, Mitchell. Imagine their relief when they see her safe." Emma's eyes met mine across the room. She shook her head once, the movement barely perceptible. Jack continued his circuit of the platform. At the west window, his shadow passed across the glass, a perfect silhouette too crisp against the darkness. I counted 7 seconds before he appeared at the south window, less time than the platform's dimensions should allow. "You don't understand what she is," Jack said, voice dropping lower. "What she does to places like this. To people like you." The floorboards beneath my feet felt suddenly cold. I curled my toes inside my boots, pushing down against the wood to reassure myself of its solidity. "She's been doing this for years," he continued. "Decades. Finding towers, finding keepers, using them until they're used up." I glanced at Emma. Her expression hadn't changed, but something shifted in her posture. A tightening around the shoulders, barely visible beneath the yellow fabric. "Ask her how old she is," Jack called. "Ask her how many lookouts she's visited before you." I remained silent, my eyes on Emma. She met my gaze without blinking. "Mitchell," Jack's voice came directly through the door now. "Last summer there was another keeper. Man named Hargrove before your friend Bob. Emma visited him too. Want to know what happened to him?" The logbook had no entries from anyone named Hargrove. The last entries before Bob's first season showed a 3-month gap, unusual for a continuously staffed position. "She left him hollow," Jack said. "Just like the others. Just like she'll leave you." The lock mechanism rattled, more violently this time. The chair legs scraped against the floor but held firm. I moved closer to Emma, positioning myself between her and the door without speaking. "I can protect you," Jack said, voice softening again. "That's my purpose here. I maintain the balance, keep things in their proper places." The tower temperature seemed to drop several degrees. I watched my breath form a small cloud in front of my face, though Emma's breathing remained invisible. "Think, Mitchell. She comes to you for protection, but what is she running from? Why would anything need to hide from me unless it had something to fear?" Jack's voice took on a reasonable, almost friendly tone. "I'm not the threat here." Emma shifted on the couch, the first movement she'd made in over an hour. Her fingers tightened around the edge of her raincoat. "The rules protect me," I said finally, keeping my voice steady. "All of the rules." Jack went silent for 23 seconds. When he spoke again, his voice came from directly beside the door, as if his mouth were pressed against the crack. Bob's rules. A soft laugh followed. Of course. They always leave rules. Little breadcrumb trails for the next poor bastard. Did Bob tell you where those rules came from? Who taught them to him? I didn't answer. The folded paper in my pocket felt heavier, like a stone pulling down the fabric. Ask your guest, Jack said. Ask her about the rules. Ask her why they exist. Emma stood in a single fluid motion, the blanket falling to the floor beside her. She crossed to the north window and placed one small hand against the glass. Her fingers left no prints, no smudges on the surface. Go away, she said, her voice clear and strong, nothing like the uncertain tone she'd used when arriving. You have no claim here. Jack appeared at the window so suddenly it seemed impossible he could have moved from the door in that time. His face pressed close to the glass, features sharp in the darkness. There she is, he said, lips pulling into a smile that revealed too many teeth. Finally speaking in your own voice. Emma's hand remained pressed against the window, separated from Jack's face by only a quarter inch of glass. The tower is closed to you. The keeper has chosen. For now, Jack replied, breath fogging the glass between them. But keepers change. Rules get forgotten. And I am very patient, little one. Emma turned away from the window, breaking whatever connection had formed between them. He'll be gone soon, she said to me, voice returning to its childlike cadence. The sun is coming. I checked my watch. 4:15. First light wouldn't reach the tower for another hour at least. Jack's laughter suggested he'd reached the same conclusion. Time works differently for her kind, he called. Slippery concept, especially when you're so very, very old. The chair beneath the doorknob shuddered as something heavy slammed against the door. The impact resonated through the tower room, rattling the dishes in the cupboard and sending my coffee mug sliding across the table. Ask her about the others, Jack shouted, voice rising to a near howl. The ones before Bob, before Hargrove. Ask her why this tower has the highest turnover rate in 3 states. Another impact shook the door. The chair creaked but held. She takes pieces of you, Jack continued, his voice strained now, desperate. Small pieces at first, dreams, memories. Eventually she'll take more. They always do. Emma returned to the couch, sitting with hands folded, expression calm despite the violence outside. She looked at me and patted the cushion beside her, an oddly maternal gesture from a child. I sat, keeping my eyes on the door. Is he telling the truth? Some of it, she replied. Enough to sound convincing. And the rest? His kind twists truth into weapons. She straightened her raincoat sleeve, adjusting a button that wasn't misaligned. He wants what all predators want, easy prey. I make it difficult. The pounding at the door stopped abruptly. Jack's footsteps circled the platform once more, unhurried now, almost contemplative. Sun's coming, Mitchell, he called, voice returned to its earlier professional timbre. I'll be back on official business tomorrow. Consider what I've said. Consider what you're harboring. His descent down the tower stairs came slow and measured, each step deliberate enough to be heard clearly. At the clearing below, his voice drifted up one last time. She won't protect you when the time comes. None of them ever do. Then silence, broken only by the natural sounds of the forest at night, wind through pine needles, an owl's distant call. The tower's wooden joints settling. Emma and I sat without speaking for 27 minutes. I counted each second, watching the minute hand on my watch trace its arc, needing the certainty of measured time. Is he gone? I asked finally. She nodded. For now. Will he come back? Yes. She smoothed her raincoat across her knees. He always does. Bob knew about this, about all of you. I reached into my pocket, touching the folded paper. He learned the rules and followed them for 11 years. Robert was a good keeper, she said, the formal name sounding strange in her childlike voice. He understood balance. And the others? Hargrove? The ones Jack mentioned? Emma's expression shifted subtly, something ancient moving behind her eyes. Some keepers try to change the rules, or make their own. It never ends well. What are you running from? I asked, echoing Jack's question. She looked toward the east window where the faintest lightning had begun at the horizon's edge. The same thing you are. And what's that? Being consumed. Her voice held none of the uncertainty she'd shown when arriving. Being less than what you are. Outside, the dark wall of forest gradually separated into individual trees as pre-dawn light filtered between trunks. The tower room remained dim, but objects began taking on form and substance after hours of existing as mere shapes against darkness. Emma stood, adjusting her raincoat with practiced movements. I need to go now. It's not fully light yet, I said, checking my watch again. 4:53. It's light enough. She moved to the door and waited, clearly expecting me to remove the chair. I hesitated, Jack's warnings still echoing. How many lookouts have there been? Before me? Before Bob? Many. Her eyes held steady on mine. Some lasted years, some only days. And what happened to them? They made choices, she said simply, just as you will. I removed the chair from beneath the doorknob and set it beside the table. The door swung open easily despite the battering it had taken. Morning air swept in, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. Emma stepped onto the platform, her yellow raincoat catching the early light. She turned back, her face half in shadow. Thank you for following the rules. That's what Bob did, I said. For 11 years. Yes. Something like a smile touched her lips, and he walked away whole. She descended the stairs without another word, each step silent against the wooden treads. At the clearing's edge, she paused, looking back up at the tower. I raised my hand in an uncertain gesture that wasn't quite a wave. She mirrored the movement, then turned and walked into the trees. I watched until the yellow of her raincoat disappeared among the greens and browns of the forest. The ground where she had walked showed no footprints, no bent grass, no sign of passage. Back inside, I removed the rule sheet from my pocket and spread it on the table. The handwritten instructions seemed both inadequate and essential now, a partial map to territory I was only beginning to understand. Rule 5 confirmed. A young girl in a yellow raincoat may seek shelter. Let her in. She will stay until morning. I opened the maintenance log, flipping back through the pages of Bob's 11 years. His entries remained consistent throughout. Weather reports, equipment checks, fire observations. Nothing about black deer or men in red jackets or children in yellow raincoats. Nothing about voices in the woods or threats hammering at the door. The tower log contained only what the Forest Service expected to see. The rules existed separately, passed directly from keeper to keeper, never officially recorded. I closed the log and returned to the window, scanning the clearing and forest edge. The morning light revealed nothing unusual, no lingering shadows, no bright red jacket among the trees, no impossible child making her way to whatever sanctuary awaited her. Just mountains and trees and empty space, stretching to the horizon in every direction. I checked my watch. 5:21. Time for the morning weather readings. I recorded the temperature, wind speed, and barometric pressure in the official log, documenting the visible and measurable aspects of my surroundings. The routine felt comforting after the night's events. Concrete tasks with predictable outcomes. The radio crackled to life at exactly 7 o'clock. The dispatcher's voice came through clear and professional, requesting the standard morning check-in. I reported all conditions normal, fire risk moderate, visibility excellent. No mention of visitors or rules or choices made in darkness. Some things belonged in the official record. Others required different forms of documentation. I took out my personal notebook and began a detailed account of the night's events. Each observation, each statement, each inexplicable moment recorded with as much precision as I could manage. Not for the Forest Service, not for any official purpose, but for myself, and perhaps for whoever might come after me. The rules protected the Tower Keeper, Emma had said, but they also protected something else, something that required safe passage through these mountains and the cooperation of those who watched from high places. I folded Bob's rule sheet and returned it to my shirt pocket rather than the desk drawer. Better to keep it close, a reminder of boundaries established long before my arrival and likely to endure long after my departure. Whatever watched from the surrounding wilderness, whatever rules governed our interactions, I had accepted my role in maintaining that delicate balance. For now, at least, I was the keeper.